was younger, he'd often take jobs that were out of town during the week. During one of these times, I was lying in bed and heard what seemed to be someone snapping their fingers in the hallway outside my bedroom. About every 20 or 30 seconds, I'd hear the snap sound, and it sounded like it would be moving from one end of the hallway and down to the other. Almost as if the person snapping was pacing back and forth. But I couldn't hear steps or anything, just snapping fingers. After a couple of minutes of listening to this, to make sure I wasn't imagining it, I called out to my brother to see if he had heard it too. We shared a room and had twin beds next to each other, separated by about a foot of space. Apparently, he had been awake also, and had heard the same noise. We listened to it for another minute or two, and with both of us being creeped out, we moved to the near side of our beds so that we were closer to each other. The snapping stopped for just enough time to build suspense. Then, we heard the fingers snap between us, almost as if whatever it was knew we were afraid and it was messing with us. With that sound, both of us bolted out of our bed and ran to my mom's room. She already had our little sister in bed with her. My sister was only 4 or 5 at the time, so she always stayed with my mom when my dad was out of town. They had both been sleeping, but obviously woke up when we ran into the room, telling them what was going on. We all quieted down and listened. The snapping stopped for a few minutes. But then it picked up in the hallway again, pacing back and forth as before. All of us heard it, including my mom. I don't know how long it was before it stopped. I guess around 30 or 40 minutes. I don't know who or what it might have been. Our house was newly built, but it was built on the location of a previous home that had been burned down. I heard over the years that an older man had died in the house that burned down, but I don't know if there was any truth to that. I just know that it terrified us. We occasionally had a few other things happen in the house. TVs would occasionally turn off on their own. I'd see fleeting glimpses of something moving in my peripheral vision, but nothing was quite as blatant and persistent as the snapping that night. A story from Oliver in St. Petersburg, Florida. Electric Spirit. About 7 years ago, I was in my old house with my ex. Something to note here is that the landlord's father had died in that house. I had my bass guitar amp on. Perhaps that generated the electrical energy needed for this thing to manifest. But across the room was a sliding door closet with mirrors on it. All of a sudden, I noticed a dark mist, and it started approaching us on the north wall. I alerted my girlfriend, and she started scrambling back towards the east wall along the side of the bed when she saw it. On its way toward us, it went over to the stand that I kept my iPod on, and it ruined it. It never worked again after this incident. As this thing came to the foot of our bed, we both felt a large cold spot. After witnessing all of this, we quickly panicked and darted out of the room. If this hadn't happened to me, I probably would have been a skeptic. But I know what I experienced. Here's a story now from Cheyenne in San Antonio, Texas. Tiffany. I was about 6 years old, and my family and I had just moved into a house in my hometown of New Mexico. It was a 3-bedroom, 2 rooms of which had been added sometime after the house was built. The original room gave me the creeps from the get-go. One day my sister was washing dishes, and I walked past the kitchen toward the bathroom that was on the right of the original room. As soon as I started walking toward the bathroom, a full apparition came flying from the bedroom. It was a little girl in a nightgown, and she told me her name was Tiffany. Fast forward to my teen years. My grandmother told me that she did some research on the house after I told her of the incident. And back in the 70s, a family had lived in the 1-bedroom house at the time, and they had a young girl named Tiffany who had drowned in the bathtub, and nobody knew how.
Hi, Lex and listeners. This is Annie calling from New Jersey again. I've sent in some stories in the past. You guys know I'm a house painter, and some of my clients have some ghost stories that I've sent in to you before. So I've got a few just short stories, but I figured I'd send them in now instead of waiting, to send a bunch of them later. The first one is about my clients, Harry and Sandy. I've told you stories about them before. They're the ones, just for a quick recap. They had a house, the previous house was most definitely haunted. And when they moved into their new house, the first night that they were staying there, the doorbell rang at 3 o'clock in the morning on the dot. And when they ran to answer the door, there was nobody there. So, the last things that have been happening recently is the TV's been turning on and changing channels, and their dogs have been seeing something and getting freaked out by that. So I talked to her a couple of weeks ago and said, hey, by the way, do you have anything going on in your house? And she said, well, yeah, actually, about a month ago, their daughter and son-in-law were visiting. So the 4 of them were sitting in the kitchen having dinner. And suddenly Sandy heard the water running in the bathroom, which was about 20, 30 feet away from them. And she said, who was in the bathroom and left the water running? And they all looked at each other and said, none of us have been in that bathroom at all. And they went in and looked, and the water was running full blast. Both taps were running absolute full blast. So they turned it off and just left it at that. And when she told me this, I said, I've heard about that on this podcast, that that's a part of some hauntings is the water in the sink will turn on by itself. And she sat there for a minute and said, something, now that I think about it, that's happened a few times recently, that she's heard water running in one of the bathrooms or the kitchen, and it's always in one of the sinks in the house. And she'll go in and think that she just left the water running. So, but apparently the ghost, who they have called Jerome, and they don't mention his name in the house, because when they do, things start to happen. But so that, I don't know, I don't know what that means. It's things, that electrical appliances are turning on, like the TV, and I know that water is a conductor for electricity. I have no idea what I'm talking about, but there must be something going on. So anyway, so that was the first story. Sandy also happens to be the president of the historical museum in my town, and the building is over 100 years old, and it is packed to the gills with antiques. And the founder of our town used to travel around the world, and he brought back things. So there are antiques from all over the world, and for over 100 years. It's amazing. And I stopped over to see her one time, and I was like, oh my God, this place has got to be haunted. And she said, yeah, there are some stories. And I was supposed to do a mural for them, but there's all kinds of stuff going on, and nobody can decide on anything right now. So I haven't been able to go over there and do that, but I told them I would paint the mural in exchange for all of the ghost stories. So the only one that I have to start with is one time a couple of years ago, one of the volunteers that works over there was walking across the street from the parking lot, came across the yard into the building and said, "Who's working out in the yard?" And they all looked at each other and said, "There's nobody working out there. What are you talking about?" And they went outside and there was no one there. And he said, "There was an old man. I think he was raking. He was doing something in the yard, but I couldn't see what he was doing." And they said, "Okay, what did he look like?" And he described this old man, probably in his 70s or 80s, wearing gray trousers with suspenders and a white button-down shirt and a straw hat. And he had a beard and glasses. And one of the women that works there went into her office, into her desk, and pulled out a photo and brought it out and held it up and said, "You mean him?" And this man, the volunteer, had never seen this picture before. And he said, "Yeah, that's exactly what he looked like. That's what he was wearing and everything." Yeah, that man died 50 years ago, and he used to be the president of the museum. And in fact, the room that they were in was named for him. So apparently he just really liked the place and is still hanging around and helping out. The only other thing I know about at the museum is that there's an old bicycle there that has a bell. And every now and then someone will hear the bell ring when nobody's in that part of the museum. So that's all the stories I've heard so far, and I will definitely, when I do get to work over there, I will get all of the stories and send them over there, because, you know, a 110-year-old building full of antiques, you gotta be kidding me. So I saved the best story for last for the holidays. One of my other clients, we were talking about ghosts, and she had a dog that she loved. He was an English bulldog named Harley, and they have motorcycles. And bulldogs, I don't really think are known for being lap dogs, but he was the cuddliest dog. He would just, if you were sitting on the sofa, he would come and snuggle up next to you, and he was just the sweetest dog. They loved him so much, and inevitably, eventually he got sick when he got old, and he had cancer. And in fact, they found in Pennsylvania animal hospital that actually treated, did cancer treatment for dogs, which is got to be unusual. And who knows how many thousands of dollars they spent to keep him alive. He lived, I think he lived another 6 months after that. But, obviously it got to a point where they just couldn't keep him alive anymore, and he was just in pain. So the whole family brought him to the vet when they had to have him put to sleep. And they were really upset, obviously, about the whole thing. But when they came home, they have pictures all over their house. And they have this picture of the dog on an end table in the living room. And she had a candle next to it. And it's one of those battery-powered ones that you have to flip a switch. And it lights up and looks like a candle. But you have to actually flip a switch. It doesn't turn on by itself. And when they came home from, having the dog put to sleep, they walked in the house and the candle next to his picture was lit. And I'm actually tearing up thinking about this. But she was crying when she was telling me this, and it was a couple of years ago. And she felt like he was telling her it was okay. So I'm going to stop crying now. And that's it. That's all the stories that I have right now. But I wanted to share them with you before the holidays. And like I said, I keep asking my clients, even though they think I'm crazy. And when I get some more ghost stories, I will send them to you. So happy holidays, everyone. And that's it. Take care.
Carrying on now with a story from Anna in the Midwest of the U.S. Haunted Institution. I used to work in a building that had been repurposed. It had previously been an institution where people with special needs lived for many years before it closed. I won't mention the name of the institution that took over the property to protect their privacy. I had my own office in the building on the ground floor. It was in the middle of a long hallway. The institution was open until 10 p.m. on weeknights, but I was usually out of there before 5 p.m. However, one evening I stayed late to catch up on some paperwork. I remember it was winter because it was only around 6 p.m. and it was very dark outside. There were many other people in the building. However, it was far less busy in the evening than the bustle of the daytime hours. I was the only one in an office in my hallway at that point. My colleagues had already left for the day. The rooms being used that evening were either down another hallway, which you had to make 2 turns to reach, or they were on the second floor. So though I would occasionally hear people out in the hallways, I was, for the most part, alone in the long hallway. My desk faced a wall with a door to my left. It was a small office, so to get to the door, I would walk around my desk. I had the door open to my office, and I could sometimes hear someone walking down the long hallway, or voices from one of the other hallways around the corner. At one point, I suddenly heard running footsteps at the far end of the hall, to the left as you exited my office. As an employee of the institution, I thought I should tell them to slow down in the building or to check if there was an emergency and if they needed assistance. I stood from my desk and walked around it so I could get to the open door. I could hear the footsteps getting closer to my office as I approached the doorway. It sounded as if the person was just at my door when I reached it, and I didn't want them to run into me, so I leaned out just a bit to look to my left. From the sounds, the person should have been right in front of me. But there was no one there, and the footsteps stopped as soon as I poked my head out of the office. Stunned, I was frozen for a minute and then tried to figure out where the person had gone. I stood there, still leaning out of my door for a few moments, just listening. The building was eerily quiet. Feeling spooked, I decided it was time to go home. I wasn't sure if it was something paranormal or if someone had really been running and then hid from me. But both options made me nervous. I did not feel any negativity or really anything at all. I only knew that I heard someone running and then they were gone. I closed up my office and then headed home. I never had another experience like that in the 8 years that I worked there.
Hi Lex, my name's Candice. I'm from Perth in Australia. I have a story that regards my auntie. So my aunt died very young. She was in her 40s, early 40s, from cancer, cervical cancer, and she lives in the country. And she would come up to the city, to Perth, to have her treatment and live with my mum and myself and my dad but yeah, she did live in the country, so she would spend, especially towards the end of her life when she was under palliative care, she was at home at her farm house, and one day my mum and my sister went down there. It's about 2 hours drive from where we were, and they just went to see her. We were all under the understanding that she had a couple of weeks left of her life. So we didn't think it was an immediate thing that was going to happen. That day that she died, Mum was down there with my sister. I was coming home from university for the day. As I was saying, we don't tend to go away for university. You tend to drive there from your home. So I was driving home from university, and I was listening to some song that came on the radio, and I just had this most beautiful feeling come over me. from head to toe, just washed over me. Kind of a feeling of relief, and it was fleeting. I kept driving home, and I was probably only about 5 minutes away from home, and I arrived home. The minute I pulled into the driveway, my dad comes running out to say that my auntie had passed away. And I said, I know. She sent me a message. I don't know. I don't know if I said she sent me a message, but I said, I know. And I was sad, extremely sad, but I was happy for her because I felt like that feeling was a beautiful feeling, and I think she was trying to communicate to me what her passing away was like. She wasn't in pain anymore. And then, my sister and my mum were in her bedroom with her the day she passed away. And my sister was probably about 17. And it really affected her to see someone pass away. And they were telling us that they were there. They were all slept over that night because, as I said, they're in the country. They couldn't go home, so they all stayed over, slept on the floor, that sort of thing. And Mum and my sister swear that night they heard crying, sobbing, and they thought, well, that's just normal. My nana, who was there, is upset. And then the next morning they were having breakfast, and they said, oh, Nan, are you okay? We heard you crying last night. And she swore black and blue. I wasn't. I was fast asleep. I wasn't crying. And nobody, out of all the people that were there, could say that they were the ones that were crying. It was just a female voice crying and sobbing and sighing. But it didn't stop there. We went to the funeral and everything, and sort of life goes on. But there was a few things that happened really centered around my sister who was there in the room when she did pass away. The first thing that happened was her phone. So this is back when you had those Nokia phones that sort of had a smaller screen and then all the digits underneath, those buttons. And she left her phone on her dresser in her bedroom, and she hadn't dropped it. She just had left it there like she always does. And she came back to grab it one day, and the whole screen had looked like somebody had pushed their thumb as hard as they could into the screen without breaking it, without smashing the glass, but just internally wrecking it. So her phone, it looked like someone had pushed their thumb into it. Her phone was completely broken, which was really odd. She couldn't remember doing anything to it that would have caused that damage, even though the screen wasn't broken. So we didn't think anything of that. And then a couple of weeks went by, and I was in the other room. I was in a separate room. She was in the bathroom, putting on her makeup or something, or going out for the night. And I heard it. The light bulb above her head completely smashed into smithereens. And I've never ever seen a light bulb do that, right above her head. And that was really scary, really, really scary. And then I can't remember the time frame, but not long after that, she lost her keys. We all looked throughout the house. You know how it drives you mad when you lose things, and people around you say, help me look. And we all looked, and she couldn't find her car keys anywhere. And we must have been looking for a day. I think she ended up using her spare keys or something. But eventually we found her keys, and they were in a very weird spot. They were behind a portrait photo of my auntie. So the photo was on a table sort of thing. So it wasn't on a wall. It was on a sort of one of those sort of A-frame things at the back. But yeah, the keys were stuffed behind that, behind a picture of her. It was just, really strange. And we always wondered why was my sister sort of the target of this activity. It went away after a while, a few months. But it's strange because she's in her 30s now, early 30s, and she was recently diagnosed with cancer, thyroid cancer. And it just made me remember all those things, those weird things that happened to her. And I think, was my auntie trying to send her a sign? I don't know. She's okay, by the way. She's fine. I don't think she's got any issues going on anymore. But yeah, it just makes me wonder. Or perhaps it's because my sister was in the room. But there was some really strange things that happened around my auntie's death. Feeling that I got in the car, the three things that happened to my sister, but other things as well, like my cousin had a photograph. This was probably about 4 or 5 years after my auntie passed away, of herself sort of sitting on a couch with her infant daughter, who really sadly never ever got to meet her grandmother, my auntie. And in this photo, and I'm sure I've got a digital copy somewhere, it looks photoshopped. It doesn't look real, to be honest, but because we all know my cousin and we know that she's not the sort to do something like that, especially when it comes to her mum. But in this picture, there is a very clear smudge of a person's figure kind of cuddling my cousin, her daughter, and sort of over the baby as well. And it wasn't a scary picture. I think it's quite beautiful, but yeah, completely unexplained. So yeah, that's my story. I hope you like it, and take care.
The next story is kind of interesting because it's from Amanda in York, Pennsylvania. And she talks about an event that her brother had shared some years back on Anything Ghost. So it kind of verifies what had happened, what her brother had shared. I thought that was cool. But anyway, Amanda has some other experiences to share. And this is Memories with the Paranormal in Granny's House. Since I was about 5 years old, I've had several experiences. I should note that I did not grow up in a religious or spiritual home, so I didn't have any kind of preconceived notions about or knowledge of the supernatural or anything like that. My first memory is from when I was about 8 years old and living in an upper-level apartment with my parents and brother. He and I shared a room. One night I woke up feeling like the room was spinning and paralyzing fear took me over. It was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I finally got up and ran to the living room where my parents were and tried to explain what I had experienced. They dismissed this as me probably just overexcited for an upcoming vacation and told me to go back to bed. And I believed it because I didn't have any reason to think anything strange like that would happen. Then the nightmares started. And I didn't find out until years later that my brother would have them too. Very vivid, gory dreams that neither of our young minds could have conjured up from watching some horror movie. A few months later, something happened in the night in that room that we wished was a bad dream. My brother awoke to the sound of crinkling papers under his bed. He thought it was our cat, but he saw a hand come up from underneath his bed. He had shared this experience with Anything Ghost a few years ago, and I was the one on the top bunk. I will never forget his screams. Grandma's house. We eventually moved, as we fairly often did, and my next memories are from my grandma's house. In the rear of our house was a door that opened to a small foyer, and in it was the stairway to go upstairs, and another door that opened to the back room that my cousins and I often played in. To the left in the back room was a short hallway that led to the rest of the first floor, the front of the house. In my teen years, my aunt would tease me about how I'd tell everyone there were evil spirits in the house when I was about 9. But I don't remember warning anyone. I do remember that rear foyer, and the second floor always scared me. In the foyer was a second refrigerator, where everyone kept sodas and other drinks for when our family would gather at Granny's. This is relevant because my cousins and I would usually be sent back there to grab drinks for the adults who were out in the living room area. I hated this, especially at night. I made a mission to get in and out as fast as I could and to definitely avoid looking up the stairs. I always felt an intense, gripping feeling in my chest that someone or something was watching me from the top of the landing. My cousins had the same feeling. There was a friend of my grandma's who apparently was clairvoyant and walked through that house many years before I was born. She made the comment that there was a presence there, but it was friendly. I didn't know this until I was in my teen years, but I beg to differ. My first encounter was on a night that I had spent the night there with my youngest cousin. Upstairs, you would walk into a large room. To the right was the door to my grandparents' room, and to the left was an opening to the hallway that led to 2 more bedrooms, a bathroom, and the doorway to the attic. My cousin and I slept in a daybed in that large room at the top of the stairs. The head of the bed was about 2 feet to the right of the opening of the hallway. We were the only ones upstairs, and as we both laid next to each other trying to fall asleep, We were startled by the unmistakable sound of footsteps in that hallway on the old creaky floor. It started from the end of the attic door and slowly made its way to our end. I turned to her, almost too scared to make a sound, and quietly squeaked, "Do you hear that?" Her eyes were huge, and she nodded quickly. We threw the blankets over our heads and squeezed each other. The footsteps stopped right at the opening, as if someone was standing staring at us. I wanted to scream. I wanted to bolt out of the bed and downstairs, but I couldn't move. It felt like forever. But whatever it was, slowly turned and began moving back down the hallway. I still feel tense thinking about that night. We fell asleep as soon as my grandparents came to their room, feeling safer, but not safe enough to tell them right then, as if the thing would come back if we talked about it. The first thing the next morning, we ran downstairs and told them. They blamed it on the house settling. I avoided sleeping upstairs until I was 16, and I heard it again, stopping outside of the door to the room I was sleeping in. I only stayed the night one more time, and it was downstairs. My cousin still remembers that night as clearly as I do. Since then, other family members experienced things there, and I will add that the aunt who used to tease me about being scared of that house will no longer go upstairs by herself, especially at night.
Hi Lex, my name is Tracy and I live in Putnam County, Indiana. And I have many stories that I can share with you, but today I would like to share with you the stories about where I currently live, which is a family farm that's been in my family for almost 100 years. We inherited the farm in 2016 and we relocated out here from another part of the county when my father passed away. And I had heard a few strange stories over the years from my stepmom. I experienced a story firsthand probably 22 years ago when I came to visit my dad one day, and I come in the house and I hollered for him and I was like, "Dad!" And I hear, "Yeah." I'm like, "Where are you at?" Because it wasn't like my dad to, if he was in the house, not to be in the living room. He was self-employed and a farmer. So if he was inside, he was either taking a break and eating lunch or watching the news. Well, I looked around and didn't see my dad, and I thought, well, maybe he's upstairs. So I go, "Dad!" And I hear, "Yeah." I'm like, "Are you upstairs?" I didn't hear anything, so I thought, well, maybe he's laying down. Maybe he's really sick. So I went up the stairs to their bedroom. Nobody was up there. So I come back down, and I said, "Dad!" And I hear, "Yeah." And this time it sounded like it was coming from the basement. So I went down into the basement. No dad. Finally, I'm like, what is going on? So I go outside and I'm looking around to see if my, dad's outside or something. And I see his blue pickup truck coming up out of the cattle pasture, and he wasn't even in the house. Well, I never really thought about that again until we inherited the house and had already sold our house to move out here. And the first night here, I'm going to be honest, I was really scared. I couldn't even sleep in any of the bedrooms. I had to sleep on the couch. I just felt like there was somebody in this house with us. And I've always been very sensitive to this, and I would say I've been sensitive since I was at least 5 years old, is when I can have my first memory of seeing an apparition or a ghost at our old house that we grew up at in the same county but a different home. And this farm was built by my great uncle and his wife, and my uncle actually would take old homes down and rebuild them here. So the garage itself is an old house out of Putnamville, Indiana, that was part of the Underground Railroad. And the house is built with reclaimed lumber as well, from where he would take old homes down. But the house in general was built in 1960s. When they passed away, my dad and stepmom inherited the farm. Now, my husband and I have the farm. Well, shortly after moving in, I kept feeling like somebody was watching me, and I would get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and swear I'd see a tall man with black hair standing in the kitchen who just looked so angry. And I kept telling myself I really felt like it was just because I was so scared and I thought the house was haunted, and I would go back to bed. And we have a couple dogs, but only one dog sleeps with us, is a little bitty dog. And he would sit on the end of the bed at point and just growl at the door during the night. And he had never done that before. So after seeing this man stay in the kitchen several times and thinking it was just my imagination, I finally went to my husband and I said, you know what? I'm going to be honest. I'm really scared. And I know you don't believe in these things, but I really feel like it's either a ghost or somebody's actually coming into our house, because it just has happened too many times. So we decided that we were going to change all the locks, because we didn't know who all had keys to the house when Dad owned it. And maybe that would just make me feel better. Well, shortly after that was deer season, and the coyotes were really bad. So one night I was home by myself, because my husband travels all the time for the living, and so do I, but he's gone more than I am. And he was gone that night, and I took the dogs out, and we had Great Dane and our other small dogs, and it was pitch dark outside, but we have motion lights on some of the barn buildings and everything. Well, when I came back in, I was looking out the window, and I noticed that the security light was on the garage. So I thought, oh, I bet those coyotes are up. I want to see how many there are, because the pack just seemed so large when you hear them, and I'm scared of them. So I look out the window, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go check our security cameras. And I'm watching our security cameras, and I'm taking my blood pressure medicine, and I see this little boy come out of the garage, and he had Pioneer-like clothing on, and he's bebopping towards my car like he's so excited and he's going to go for a ride. And all of a sudden, he just swoosh, he is gone. And I literally thought I was going to have a heart attack. I about choked on my water. I wish my cameras had been on record. And I was so scared that night I had to sleep with all the lights on in the house, because I don't know if I've ever seen a child entity, but that was the first time I had ever seen one, and I felt like I wasn't supposed to see him, and I did not know what the repercussions were going to be from it. So moving forward over the last couple of years, several other things have happened. I'm not seeing the little boy again, but for example, I come home from work one day, and the first thing I do is let the dogs out, and I come in the house and I hear the stereos on. And I'm like, okay, the stereo's all the way upstairs. None of us ever go upstairs, because it's just my husband and I. And at that point, I freeze. And I call my brother, whose house is on the farm as well. And I'm like, you got to get up here. Dad's stereo's on upstairs. And I'm scared to death to go up there. I just can't do it by myself. So he comes flying up here, and we go upstairs. And sure enough, Dad's stereo's on, and it's set to Dad's station. So we just think, well, we had a visit from Dad. And all the closet doors are open upstairs. Everything's open. Nothing's missing, like somebody's been in the house, but all the doors are closed. And there's a gate on the bottom of our stairway, so the dogs cannot get upstairs. So I know nothing happened with the dogs. So we come back downstairs, and then I realize the closet doors are open downstairs as well. So we really felt like maybe we just had a visit from my dad, which was kind of endearing, since he did pass away here outside. But there's been several other things that's happened where I'll shut all the curtains before I go to bed in the living room, because again, I'm home by myself, and the dogs will start barking, and I'll get up and the curtains will be open, or I'll lock the doors and shut the lights off on our back porch, and the light will be on the back porch, and the door will be unlocked, or the front door will be unlocked. And so those are little things that really I really start noticing, and they start to bother me, and I'm like, how is this happening? And, of course, nothing like this happens to my husband. It only happens to me. Well, before my dad passed away, my daughter experienced the same trickster of mimicking voice when she came to bring my dad lunch, and she had come to the door, and the door was locked, and she could hear my dad's dog inside, and she could hear somebody going, shh, be quiet, hush, be quiet. And she couldn't figure out why my dad would not let her in. So she called me, and she was just kind of heartbroken. She's like, Mom, Papa's in the house, but he won't let me in, and I've got lunch for him. And she goes, and the door's locked. I go, well, maybe something's wrong. Go around to the other door. And she came around to the back door. The same thing happened. She was like, shh, be quiet, to the dog, because Cosmo was barking. So finally, and I'm still on the phone with her, she walks around to the front of the house, and the front door is unlocked, and my dad's not even in the house. He is out in the garage in his workshop the whole time. So she experienced the same trickster voice. I think the one that really made my hair stand up the most, though, was just here recently in November, when I was asleep in bed by myself. Again, my husband was gone on the traveling, and I wake up at 2:00 in the morning to hear the vacuum running. And I laid there for a few minutes thinking, is that the vacuum? And then I got scared. I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to get up and go see what's going on. So I make myself get out of the bed, and I get one of my dogs up, the biggest dog I have, to come with me. And I go into my kitchen, and my vacuum cleaner is running through my kitchen by itself. That one got me pretty good. I was pretty scared. I decided I was going to smudge the house again, cleanse the house, because I had done it one other time when we first moved in. And then later on in the day, I realized it was my dad's birthday. So I can't say that all the sightings we have here are just my dad, because the trickster voice has been happening, I know, for over 20 years. I've personally seen the little boy come out of the garage. Personally have seen somebody standing behind my vehicle with my backup camera early in the morning when I'm leaving for work, which was just a full body apparition. That one got me pretty good too. And I've now experienced my vacuum cleaner running through my kitchen by itself. So I just wanted to share these stories with you. I have many stories over the years. Maybe I'm a little gifted on site, but I wanted to get this story out there to people to let them know how mysteriously haunted this old farm is. Thanks for listening to my story, and take care.
And that's it for Anything Ghost number 253. And I didn't mention it, but I have a VIP group, and that's where I house the complete archives of Anything Ghost. So if you would like to hear Anything Ghost from its inception, which was in January of 2006, it's been over 12 years of Anything Ghost, and they're all available in one place, the Anything Ghost VIP group. And for more information, go to www.anythingghost.com. and then go to the Join the VIP Group tab. There's a one-time membership fee, and that will put you into the Anything Ghost VIP group. So for 12 years plus of Anything Ghost, go to www.anythingghost.com. For everything Anything Ghost, including my books, go to www.anythingghost.com. Thanks everybody for all your stories. I'll talk to you in show number 250.